She has started an interesting initiative looking at mentoring junior doctors, and I would be delighted if Prof. Dlova would be able to share the ins and outs about that program a little bit later when we speak on solutions. But no doubt she has a tremendous amount of experience that would be valuable to the conversation broadly. Good evening, Prof. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Okay, we will come back to Prof in a second. We also have on the call Dr. Antoinette Miric, who is a psychiatrist. She is also the co-founder and the co-founder of the Health Worker Care Network. As you've seen in the documentary, it's a network that was recently set up to provide psychological support for healthcare professionals across the country free of charge. And they have an array of services. Antoinette, good evening, and I'm sure we'll chat about your services and what you do in a moment or two as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Adil. Thank you so much.
And then last but not least is Dr. T, a real household name. You've obviously met her, if you didn't before, in the documentary, Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. She's an author. She's also the UN rapporteur on the right to health. I hope I got that right. And tremendous amount of experience, especially around gender and health and gender discrimination in health. And I'm hoping that we can unpack some of those issues around gender and health with you. So good evening and thank you for making the time, Tlaleng.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So perhaps let's move straight ahead to the issues and the themes. And let's start with bullying. And I'll just go sort of as they were presented in the documentary. And Tlaleng, I can perhaps start with you. What's noted in the film is that bullying is not always easy to pinpoint, and whereas discrimination and harassment is well defined in labor law. Would you care to share what your experience has been with some of these issues, especially around microaggressions in the workplace and things that you cannot quite pinpoint, but overall, anybody that has worked in it or been subjected to it knows exactly what is being referred to. Would you care to share any of your experiences with regards to this?
Absolutely, and I think it's important to have this discussion, and underscore the fact that, even in undergraduate medical training, many of us experience already at that stage, some verbal, abuse or harassment, and the culture of silencing often starts to be learned, at that undergraduate level, where you start to know that if you go to this particular ward in this particular hospital, or if your consultant is this particular person in this particular rotation, you learn how to talk, you learn how to walk, you learn what not to say, you learn how to please them so you can just make it out of that system and make it out of that rotation. And I think that is unfortunately the culture of medical training, and something that I've experienced myself. Some people can experience even in the workplace when we get qualified, as well as when we are trying to specialize. And it's such a bad thing, because often when you come into these spaces, you are told by your seniors that, in fact, we also went through this.
Yeah.
And so you must just bear it. And I think that's why we can't even quantify it. We can't quite put our finger on it, because if everyone around you says to get through this, to get to be a doctor, to get to graduate, to pass your exams, you need to avoid irritating or getting into the bad books of one particular consultant. And therefore it's normalized. And so it's very difficult, Adil, to be in a space now where some of us are a little bit further removed from the academia, right? Where you can start to process what has happened and what that system did to you as a person, but also start to question how we can make it better.
Yeah.
But for those colleagues who are still operating in that system, who are still working within that system, it is very, very difficult. And sometimes we avoid talking about these things. We avoid trying to analyze and understand them because we would then have to do something about them. And if something means that qualifying or risking your success as a medical doctor in the public sector, especially, sometimes we keep quiet. And I'll be honest with you, in this journey with you that we've undertaken for the past few years, I've often had memories and some triggers, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that was actually so abusive.
Yeah.
And had I not been in this process with you and in this documentary, I may have never had to come face to face with the reality that, in fact, I myself was sexually abused by one of my colleagues in theatre. And that has taken me all these years to just finally remember and then accept what has happened. So I think that before we can even understand, for many of us, we have these traumas that are buried, that are deep, that we still firstly need to understand and feel and validate before we can even get academic and start theorizing and talking about all of it. And of course we should, but I think for me, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we are having these discussions as survivors ourselves, and as people who are trying to make things better. But it's quite difficult and often re-traumatizing to have these discussions.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on fantastic points. The first one that I wanted to pick up on is the perpetual nature of these issues. It came out quite clearly in the film as well, is that there's a cycle of abuse. Those that are bullied today become bullies later because they are a product of the societies. And it is really up to us, those that have been through it, to take a step back and say, well, let's do something about it. Because the tendency is there, and I think Nadia mentioned it in the film, or that, well, I've been through it, so what does it matter? My time is done, my internship is done, my specialist training is done. It's somebody else's problem. And until we learn to pay it forward for future generations, then those grievances and those issues will remain. And the other point that you made is also equally important, that this platform is primarily there to validate people's grievances, to give people the belief that they are taken seriously and heard, and especially again when it comes to things like bullying, when you cannot pinpoint it, is to say, well, there is people that believe you, and even if at times you don't believe it yourself, because that's how we are indoctrinated. Antoinette and Prof. Dlova, would you care to share any of your experiences specifically on this? Perhaps I can start with you, Antoinette.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So, I think as Dr. Mofokeng was speaking, I too was triggered back to my junior years. I'm qualified for 20 years now, and I have quite, strong memories of certain events at kind of quite a large academic hospital. And you're absolutely right. I didn't say, well, actually I did say something. I did speak to the HOD, but I just needed to get out of the hospital. I didn't take it any further. And this is what we do. And I think it is significant on for healthcare workers. I think it's our healthcare workers without this, these things happening at work, are already stressed, already burnt out. And I do think that this leads to, more mental distress. And I'm seeing in the chat, lots of people mentioning the word traumas.
Yeah.
And we need debriefing, and it's real. I do think as healthcare professionals, though, what we do once we finish our younger years. Bobby, could you just put your audio on? We literally just get on with it, forget it, and move on with our lives. And that's not the great approach.
Just unmute me quickly. Yeah, and I wanted to to go to a question in the chat from Richard Cook, and perhaps Prof. Dlova, I can direct this at you because I think this is right up your alley, touching on what we can do in terms of policy and what we can do in terms of the medical curriculum to create change. It's touching on, should we rather think about how medical students are taught. And Tlaleng, I know you mentioned it in the film as well, but Prof. Dlova, I'll be very interested to hear your opinion as the HOD of medicine, and started to think about how medical students are trained, what we can do from an institutional perspective to change, to bring about a cultural shift.
Thanks, Adil. I don't know if you can see me.
We can, yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for asking me to comment, and thanks to all of you for the great initiative that you have taken to bring all these challenges, the issues to the fore. Because as they say, societies die and the world collapses because of the good people who say nothing and keep silent. So I really do like the millennials. And one thing I like about them is their assertiveness and their confidence and knowing their rights. And because if you compare with us when we trained in the 80s, so much of this has happened. Some of us, are actually the bearers of that trauma. But again, because people are different, and the psychiatrists and psychologists will agree with me, some may actually go for mental exit and others go for physical exit. So those who physically exit are the registrars or doctors who feel, I cannot stand this bullying, and then they leave specializing on medicine altogether. And that's not what we want to happen. So I think to answer your question, regarding the undergraduate training, I think it's important to train our students that, to teach them about self-confidence, teach them about knowing their rights, and also mutual respect. We would like our students to respect us, but we should also give them the respect that they need. And this hierarchy and bullying in academia, I don't think this is only unique for medical school. I think it happens in all disciplines, whether I go to engineering or architecture, all the medical, all the training disciplines. So what we are also doing, we need to really have oversight committees and accountability committees where students feel free to voice their challenges with a particular individual or particular discipline without fear of being victimized or intimidated. So that is something that we do not have, and we need to find a way, because each time when you speak to students, and I know that in most institutions, there will be some heads of departments or disciplines that are notorious for really creating problems within students and registrars and some junior consultants. But they're almost like untouchables because nobody wants to deal with them. Nobody wants to say anything. Either that person is so good in something and is such a great researcher, the university can't, they feel they're indispensable. So those are the things that I think we really need to find these oversight committees where interns or young doctors can actually approach these committees, voice out their challenges, and those must be the issues must be challenged. There must be accountability, and action must be taken serious and against individuals who perpetuate that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I couldn't agree with you more. There has to be more oversight. And there was a question in the comment, how I got people to come forward with their stories of bullying. With great difficulty is the answer. And it speaks to this fear of coming forward that you mentioned, Prof. This fear of reprisal. Because people are seen to be untouchable, and therefore those that are bullied are hesitant to come forward because they are under the impression that nothing is going to be done. And in fact, when they do come forward, there is such a lack of transparency in the grievance process that they are so disenchanted with the whole process that subsequently, or in conversation with friends and colleagues, in the future, these things don't go forward. I wanted to quickly take the opportunity to share a story with you that was shared with me in confidence. But I won't obviously name any names, that speaks very acutely to this issue. It was while I was collecting the stories in 2018, as I mentioned. This person was a junior doctor. They had complained about the conduct of a senior, following the correct channels set out by the hospital's HR. And they went to the coordinator, formulated really articulately what the grievances were, put it in a formal letter, and sent it to the person, I think it was the hospital manager, expecting, a transparent process and hopefully ultimately, something to change. But what transpired, in fact, was that the message, the email, was sent verbatim to the consultant in question, who then took the opportunity and the loftiness of their position on a ward round to read it, to all the staff members, patients, students, what the grievances were. Didn't go as far as to name the person in question, but clearly scoffing at the fact that a grievance came through and directed to them. Naturally, where does that leave the person? What belief in the system do they have that they felt that they had a valid grievance, they followed the correct avenue, and yet they were scoffed at? And I think it just encapsulates the whole the feeling around not getting any joy from the system. So first they have to overcome the fear. When they do overcome that fear, the system doesn't work for them. An oversight committee would go a long way in this, to ensure that these channels are anonymized, or freely available and accessible, that people know about them, and ultimately, people that are higher up, such as HODs and senior members of the hospital, have the authority to hold those that are accused of these actions accountable. So I couldn't agree with you more. So perhaps let's shift gears slightly, and let's move towards discrimination. And one of the for the outside, for the general public, and I hope that there are a few of those members on this call today, it might not be obvious that medicine has, Tlaleng, as you say, long-standing, well-known gender and racial discrimination. Would you care to expand on that, as to how you draw the link between medicine as a profession and patriarchy and gender and racial discrimination, how the two intersect, and perhaps touch on what those historical reasons are, as you mentioned in the film?
Yeah, and I'd like to underscore what Prof. Dlova was saying, that some of the challenges that we speak about in the documentary and this evening, are replicated in other faculties and in other industries. And, our country is a prime example of how harmful societal norms get perpetuated and become institutionalized and become part of systems, to a point where it's accepted as normal that there are more male doctors because men are just more ambitious. As opposed to if young women are able to complete school and are not risk of being raped and then getting an unsupportable pregnancy, of which they can access a safe abortion for, and are therefore unable to finish primary school, sometimes high school, and are then unable to get into tertiary, including medical school. So I think mine is one of questioning, and that's why I link gender and race to this, because I don't accept that even in a country such as South Africa, you still have predominantly Black medical campuses and Black medical schools, and where we know that even in terms of the demographics, it's still something that people are constantly having to fight to ensure that Black women are in these institutions. Firstly, we can finish high school healthy and well, and secondly, we can get into medical school and finish. So we can't divorce or extricate the difficulties and the power dynamics that are experienced in the medical faculty outside of the society that we come from and this country that we live in. Still, in terms of opportunities, still very much racialized and gendered in terms of what's available. And so in terms of, again, access to services and resources to then, find recourse for some of these things that we go through and that we navigate. I always give the example of how even when you read newspapers, right, and they talk about the high rate of teenage pregnancy, you are always going to see a belly of a Black child, a Black girl child, right? That's not a coincidence that all the stock photos in all the newspapers and in all the media houses, all they have is Black bellies of Black girl children. So I live in a world where I don't accept that. I know that there are structural drivers and there are issues that happen and lack of access to services that lead certain demographics always at the bottom and always neglected, even where there are chances of recourse or justice or getting over a certain incident. For many Black young girls, it's very difficult. And for some of us, I know for sure that I wasn't the smartest or the most hardworking in my community growing up. But there were certain things that happened, certain miracles that happened along the way, certain accesses that I had that could then lead me to a place where I could go to medical school, where I could access a NEFSAS bursary and graduate. And that's why some of us, we keep quiet with the trauma, because you know what it took for your mother to get you to medical school. So you're not going to ruin it by risking speaking out if that means you may be expelled or you may be harassed further or victimized to a point where you can't finish medical school. We know what's happening currently at the university currently known as Rhodes with one of the young women who were protesting rape culture, Yolanda Janji. She was expelled and they won't give her transcripts and she cannot continue her academic career in any university in this country. And she's a Black young woman who was protesting rape culture and how management were dealing with rape and rape culture in the institution. So not only do we have it hard in just navigating life, but even the systems that are supposed to be protecting you are the ones that punish us. And so we learn that systems punish us from a very young age, whether it's church, religion, culture. The systems of patriarchy that exist in medicine exist elsewhere in society. So by the time we come to medical school, we are already primed to be quiet. We are already primed and we accept to be shamed and blamed as victims of sexual abuse and assault and harassment. And this is what perpetuates that cycle, because then it depends on me mounting an individual response to people who are consultants, who are professors, who have a legacy of excellence in their field. And here comes this random junior person who wants to discredit them. And so the problem is that all of the societal issues always disproportionately affects people that look like me. And it's not that we are inherently vulnerable or inherently just at risk. There are processes and systems in place that make us more vulnerable than everyone else. And on top of that, we are also the least of people to be able to access justice and recourse. And in fact, the very systems that are meant to protect us punish us.
Yeah, and I just wanted to pick up on one or two points that you mentioned. That first of all, the onus is almost on the victim. The onus is almost on the person who is suffering the abuse to come forward and to provide the evidence and to change and challenge the status quo. And as you mentioned, that word legacy. There's so many people in these high positions that have this legacy that are feel untouched or feel that they can't be touched because of the protection. And that's wrong. I mean, these are the people that need to be supported. It cannot be that the person who is complaining about it has to be thrown against all the odds, because then nothing will change. And I think that's a very valid point, is that we need to start looking from a, and I see Blanche mentioned in the chat, from a more from a top-down than a bottom-up approach. The higher echelons are the ones that need to drive the change, not the lower rungs. And I know, Tlaleng, you mentioned this as well, that there has to be more leadership. There has to be more accountability. There has to be people who get to those positions to say, well, hang on a second, what is actually happening here? We need to think about change. We need to hold our peers accountable for their actions and not let them do these things. So absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Antoinette and Prof. Dlova, would you care to share any of your specific experiences around discrimination? It's by no coincidence, before I perhaps hand over to you, that the majority of our respondents in the film, as well as people that have come back to me and people on this panel, are female. There is such a massive gender component to this debate, and it comes up over and over. And many people that have shared their experiences with me, especially people that have been in the system for a while and have qualified or are in senior leadership positions, have some instance or anecdote to share of gender discrimination or abuse. I'd be interested to know if you have any personal experience or any anecdotes of colleagues or friends that you would like to share as well.
Hi. I mean, I feel, obviously, as a white female, I can't fully understand, and I wasn't discriminated against because of my race, and that is a product of the society that we are in. However, I was discriminated against because of my gender. I took a scenic route in order to specialize, and I took some time out to have my children. And it really wasn't understood, actually, by both my female and my male colleagues. In fact, when I went, I was doing psychiatry, and I spoke to a senior male psychiatrist when I said, listen, I needed to take some time out. It was quite condescending, the reply, like, are you even going to come back? And it's a problem. I mean, what I do find in terms of specifically gender is, and I see in my practice, that females who are wanting to get pregnant while they're specializing, doing ComServe, it is frowned upon. I mean, it's not a good thing, and that also needs to change. I mean, it's a huge issue. But there is this huge culture. I like the comment there in terms of the top-down and the bottom-up approach. It is a way, actually, we've been approaching mental health issues in healthcare workers. There needs to be an active, passionate, senior level discussion, which can drive the change and, point out that this is not okay. And I agree with Prof. Dlova that, the younger doctors, I'm very happy that people are speaking out more now. They're saying this is not okay. And I think the combination of the two, I'm not quite sure how, because it is so institutionalized, it is so systemic, not just in medicine, but it's coming through from the communities. It is a huge issue. And it feels almost kind of a bit like too big to even, like, where to start. I suppose that's where I'm left feeling at this stage.
Yeah. I wanted to just quickly look at the chat. There's a question from Lyanne. How do we move forward if the perpetrators are not part of the conversation? And it's a very valid point. Anybody that has joined this evening, anybody that has watched the documentary, is part of the solution. I mean, it really goes without saying that there's probably a large population of people that we're not reaching who need to be part of this conversation. And again, I want to lean on Prof. Dlova for an answer. My feeling is that it is up to leadership structures to have that conversation with people that are unwilling. If they're unwilling, it will have to be by force. And so my feeling is that we would have to incorporate it formally, either with at the institutional level or as part of formal training, to then force everybody, whether or not they are perpetrator or victim, to undergo this mandatory training and oversight. Prof. Dlova, do you have another suggestion how we bring that whole wing of people that haven't joined in this conversation, how we bring them on board?
Yeah, look, I think Antoinette is correct that it's part of our, the way the racism, the apartheid, and where we come from. And that becomes a reflection of also what happens in the tertiary institutions. And I mean, a number of subtle things that happen that I've observed, well, I've personally experienced and I've also observed. And the thing is, it's almost like parent and a child. If your mom or dad does things in a certain way, that's, the role modeling that you learn when you're growing up becomes part of you. So what actually happens is that these junior consultants or interns who were handled in a really terrible manner, now they learn to do things the same way and they perpetrate, then it becomes a vicious cycle that this is how you show your dominance as a senior intern. So for example, if you start from high up, professors, they will influence consultants influence registrars influence medical officers influence senior interns, ComServe and junior interns and medical students up to first year and sixth year. So role model is really part of this because most of us learn by watching and listening. It's not what we sometimes say, but sometimes what we observe. So that cycle has to break. And it starts with each and every one of us. Because right now, I know that there are junior doctors, for example, ComServes or junior interns or senior interns who may shirk work, who are not good to their patients, they're not compassionate, they don't come on time, they don't follow up patients, they don't do what they're supposed to do. But that's human nature. There'll be good people and there'll be bad people. But we need to have more of the good people so that role modeling is about doing the right thing, observing the right thing. So we spoke about discrimination, and it happens, in so many ways. I know in my experience as a dean, I've had to actually deal with two heads of departments who were problematic, and these people have been problematic for a long time. But I decided that, I'm going to ruffle the feathers. I'm going to rock the boat and ensure that these people are accountable. Unfortunately, we were able to get rid of those two heads of departments who were really ruining the lives of registrars. In one department, I think 50% of the registrars resigned because of this particular individual, and nobody wanted to deal with it. So in the chats, I think you mentioned also, Adil, that it's really about also the leadership. We have to take the stand. We have to make those decisions and ensure that we deal with the people who perpetrate all these unpleasant acts on junior interns or doctors, for that matter.
Yeah, I think.
And I think one of the things we could look at, someone mentioned that it's having, we've been having posters about COVID and HIV and all of that. In medical schools, we need to have posters everywhere about academic bullying. Because some people don't know what academic bullying is. They don't know what subtle racism is. They don't know what institutional racism is. So these posters should be everywhere so that they talk to us. We see this all the time. And also, when first years come in, they should be armed with what this means, what may happen during your career. And if this happens, these are the steps that you need to take. These are the people that you have to see. And if the senior people do not do anything about it, then that accountability or oversight committee is actually consulted and things have to be done. But also bearing in mind that us as doctors also have to try and be the best that we can and embrace our profession and patients. Thank you.
I think, Prof. Dlova, what we need is more people like you in senior leadership positions. That is exactly what we need. Perhaps to wrap up this discussion on bullying and discrimination, I want to put a question out to the panel in general. Perhaps two parts. The first is, and this was asked by Mishka in the chat, what can you do if you have a colleague, if you've got a friend that or a loved one, that's being bullied and discriminated against in the workplace? What do you do as a person of support? Above the encourage him to follow the what channels there are, how can you offer your support? How can you acknowledge that they've been through these issues, and at what point would you advise them to remove themselves from that environment if it's not going well, and if it is touching on their mental health, which we'll come to in a second? I'll put that out there if anybody wants to have a go.
Yeah, look, Adil, often when we speak about, issues of harassment and especially in the workplace, we tend to think about it as if it's happening outside of being held accountable by the criminal justice system. I don't know why academic institutions are so hell-bent on dealing with these issues of human rights violations via internal processes which are ineffective, which are many times people are conflicted, right, who are dealing with these things. And I think, especially in South Africa, institutions of higher learning, when it comes to issues of harassment and bullying and rape and violence on campuses, continue to fail the survivors. And I think it's important, when you are supporting an individual person, to get guidance from that person. What do they need from you in the moment? And it may be about containment, about debriefing, and about safety. And perhaps that's all you can do too, because you are yourself maybe a fellow student who's navigating that difficult time and moment and that space as well. So there's also so much perhaps you can do as a peer. But I do think there's something to be said about dealing with these issues with the seriousness they deserve and as a criminal issue. Because I think that's what actually we are all accountable to. We are all accountable to the Constitution. And if our rights are violated or abused in some manner, we should be able to do an internal process of accountability between the employer and the employee. But you as a victim have all your rights still to go and pursue other ways of justice. And it's just about making sure that justice is accessible, that survivors' needs are centered first, and that the response is guided by what the survivor or the victim needs at that moment. And the issue of prescription and all of that stuff is another layer that we need to talk about, right? And people just need to understand legally what certain timeframes mean. But I think beyond that, we do need to listen to the survivors. There isn't one solution that fits everybody. And it's about having enough support and guidance for every single person, regardless of what type of resolution they would want. But also move away from this habit, a bad one at that, where academic institutions want to deal with these issues as just internal process issues outside of a criminal case or pursuing justice in that manner.
The hospital isn't on a different planet. We're still governed by the same rules. But sometimes, I take your point that these people in the positions feel as if they are immune. And because of the, whatever it may be, the ego, the high pressure environment, the lofted kind of self-worth, feel immune to the processes that are out there. But you make a valid point that they are not. And it touches on a question raised in the chat, I think it was by Zolelwa, about whether or not you can actually open a restraining order against somebody that's bullying you. Yes, you can. According to legal law, labor law, you are perfectly entitled to do so. And Marita in the film makes the point that then speaking again about top-down versus bottom-up approach, the onus isn't on you as the victim, the onus is on the employer to actually do something about it. Whether that has actually happened in reality is perhaps a slightly different question to ask. But yes, it is that is what the law governs. I see time is getting the better of us. I want to move on to a big topic, which is mental health. And Antoinette, I want to rope you in here as much as possible. There was an interesting discussion happening in the chat about resilience and resilience building. And somebody suggested that resilience training should be part of the undergrad curriculum, to which many responded that, well, that's kind of putting a plaster on a gaping wound. That if you're not really addressing what the underlying structural and systemic issues are, what's the point of resilience? I think there's still a place for resilience building because of the sheer nature of being in the health profession. But I'll be very interested to understand what your approach would be in terms of where you see resilience training and where you see how structurally and systemically these issues affect mental health in general, and whether or not we can, where our focus should be.
Thanks. Really, really good question. And I think if you follow the literature on resilience and healthcare providers, it's something I think which irritates healthcare workers to be kind of told that their resilience needs to increase in order to cope. My personal views is that by virtue of getting into medical school, by virtue of surviving medical school, our resilience is pretty high anyway. Resilience is the ability to cope with adversity. Yazine, if you could just turn your volume off. So, it is the ability to cope with adversity, but it's not the ability to cope with bullying. It's not the ability to cope with discrimination. You can't develop resilience against that. We are resilient beings. That being said, and I've actually just recently done another webinar on burnout, I think people need to understand that if we boost our innate resilience, which I suspect as healthcare workers is pretty high anyway, we can survive the other systemic issues within the workplace. The very high patient load, the decreased resources, difficult working conditions. And yes, of course, we must talk about them and work for them. But that's where, resilience training, but also the knowledge on how to prevent burnout, how to look after yourself. I think most of the junior doctors, myself included, had absolutely no clue that you actually had to look after yourself. I think we realized that once we get out of ComServe. I see one of the messages there is, I'm waiting to finish community services before I get help. I hear this often from patients, they're waiting to get through this hell, and then they'll get mental health help. But I think in terms of resilience training, I prefer it's kind of growth training or mental health growth. At medical school, I think it would be very vital. It's not very interesting for students to hear about it. They don't quite understand why it's so important. We are going to be talking to Judasa and some junior doctors who I think are now burnt out and need some assistance. So therefore, they will be listening to what we're saying. But the answer is, in terms of resilience, I'd like to boost the resilience so we can stand up to the discrimination and bullying. That would be useful. However, when it's kind of so systemic and you're young and you're junior and you're just trying to get through, you're going to use every ounce of resilience to just cope. So that's my view on resilience training.
I think for a lot of people that watch the film, especially for those outside of the profession, they would have been quite surprised by the study from Wakiti and Stefan to show such a high burden of mental health problems amongst, well, that was medical students. But I mean, one can often generalize, and looking at other literature, the high levels. So for the general viewer, they would have been quite surprised by that. For the panel, were you surprised? What are your experiences? Um, Somebody has described medicine as an occupational hazard. Working in the health workplace as suicide is an occupational hazard. Would you agree? Is it on the rise? And Antoinette, perhaps I can lean on you again for this in terms of what your own experiences and what the literature suggests. And then part two of the question is then, how do we take it seriously in the workplace? How do we destigmatize it in the workplace? How do we create channels, both undergrad and as well in the actual workplace, for these issues to be adequately addressed?
So, I mean, those are excellent questions. And once again, I do really appreciate your generation being able to talk about this, because my generation wasn't able to. I think mental health issues, depression, anxiety are on the rise worldwide, general population. And that it's going to be, in terms of disability and affecting functioning, one of the highest things, if not the highest disability. I think Dr. Mofokeng can speak to us about that. And healthcare workers are more predisposed, basically because of the high levels of work stress, and then also by the nature of our personalities. We generally are hard workers, perfectionistic people, don't like saying no, people pleasers, and a little bit neurotic. It's a perfect storm for developing depression and anxiety because we don't stop. We don't have those brakes on. So there's a couple of reasons why we have higher rates of mental health issues. The suicide rates, we don't have statistics in South Africa, but the suicide rate they're watching very closely in the US of healthcare workers. And the stats at the moment is it's 400 doctors a year commit suicide. It's a whole medical school class in America. And that's huge. And it's going to be on the rise. How do we bring it in? I really think that obviously we need to bring it in probably in 5th and 6th year, start talking about it. It also needs to start with destigmatizing psychiatry. I love psychiatry, so I was a bit biased, but most of the other students kind of didn't take it seriously, talked about the psych patients making noise. If you're stigmatizing a whole discipline and you're stigmatizing patients, you're not going to take any conditions within yourself seriously. One, because you don't want that stigma. You don't want to be like that. Of course, you wouldn't want to see a psychiatrist because the psychiatrists were called for those screaming patients in casualty. You don't quite understand. And there's a huge stigma against getting help. So I would look at kind of introducing mental health discussions, group discussions in 5th and 6th year, definitely with interns. Start discussing these issues. I think if you started as just part of the standard curriculum, or it would be helpful. And going through, because you've got a bit of a captive audience in internship and community service, because they're there, they have to be there. I just want to chat a little bit about the work we are doing, the Healthcare Workers Care Network.
Yes, please.
So we did start during COVID-19 to provide support to any healthcare worker in the country. However, we were planning to start it before this, and we are planning to continue this. Our main aim is, during COVID, it's been looking at the mental health issues, but we are talking about everything we're discussing tonight in terms of high rates of depression, anxiety, distress. Substance abuse is a big thing in our profession. And we're talking about looking at a top-down approach. We're looking at a bottom-up approach. Our network itself, even anyone on the call or anyone in South Africa can contact us on our website, the Healthcare Workers Care Network, and we have a database of 500 psychologists and psychiatrists who've offered their time to assist, and they're offering 4 free sessions for anyone. I'm really encouraged at so far we've had about 200 healthcare workers reach out, probably about 100 doctors. I'm so encouraged by some of the doctors, junior doctors, who've taken it up, and most excitingly, they're staying in therapy. They're carrying on with the therapist. So after the 4 free sessions, they're carrying on, and I think it's pretty amazing. So it's about recognizing the symptoms, knowing that we're not immune to depression, knowing also that, if you think back to your knowledge, mental health disorders occur between the ages generally of 18 and 25. I mean, this is the same time we're studying. This is the same time we going to be doing all these really stressful things. So, yeah, there needs to be a lot more awareness, a lot more talking about it. But it starts with the destigmatization. I mean, even among psychiatrists, there's a stigma.
I think it's a fantastic resource, and I would encourage all healthcare professionals on the call to reach out. It's free. It's absolutely free. And I'll pop the links to the website and how to access it digitally on our social media pages as well. Perhaps let's take the opportunity in coming towards the closing now to really start to then talk about solutions. And Prof. Dlova, if you would be so kind as to indulge us with the fantastic program that you have recently launched, which looks at internship mentorship from seniors. But I won't say too much. Would you care to give a brief overview of the program and outline what are your plans moving forward?
Thanks a lot, Adil. Yes, so this is something that we've been planning from last year, and we're hoping to launch it last year. Unfortunately, there were some other delays, but I'm grateful to the interns. We're very supportive in terms of assisting me to implement this. I think one of them was Dr. Solelwa Sikumba, whom I just met coincidentally, and he was telling me that he's doing internship, and I said, you know what, why don't we start a program where we support interns? So it's called the Intern Mentorship and Support Program. We have a series of workshops. We had one in September, which was our launching series. This is also supported by Investec, as well as the South African Committee of Medical Deans. So we hold talks addressing different aspects of interns, and the aim is to guide them through a series of monthly workshops on career guidance, financial fitness, personal development and self-empowerment, research for those who want leadership, soft skills, and pursuing other careers outside clinical medicine. So what I realized was that, we've got, after final year, the medical students going to internship, they've always been under somebody else's wing, they were protected, guided. And then all of a sudden, they are released out there, and they obviously fall under Department of Health. But those who are actually located next to academic institutions and universities, there is a role that we can play as deans in terms of assisting them and roping them into our systems. Some already know what they want to do, and they want to specialize, and they know what field they want to specialize in. For those interns, we can channel them to those disciplines because we know the heads of departments. If they want to watch in theater, in ophthalmology, in thoracic, they want to do research with those clinicians, we can actually assist them in making sure that they get that mentorship. Those who are not sure what they want to do, again, we can assist them in terms of showing them the options that are available to them, so that if they want to specialize in a particular field, then create an opportunity for them and see how that field is. Of course, those who want to go to private practice, we've invited GPs to talk about private practice, what it means, it's a business, and how we should go about it. So those are the thoughts that we have around the support, and hoping that this is going to be continuous, sustainable, and we're looking forward to other interns taking over when the previous interns were in charge in the committees are supposed to be leaving and moving to other areas. So this year, it was amazing to have Andreas, who's been assisting us, and Ludo and other interns. So next year, we're hoping other interns will join us. There's a committee. We have intern curators from all the hospitals in KZN. But from next year, I'm hoping that this will be implemented nationally. And of course, the deans from all the 10 medical schools have agreed to assist with this program because they think it's a program that is worth pursuing and for supporting interns and junior doctors. And of course, mental wellness is also part of it. We talk about mental wellness. We also have resources to support them whilst within these medical schools. So we had about 200 interns who joined the webinar on the 16th of September. And amazing comments that some of the doctors saying, they wish they had this platform whilst they were interns. But I guess things get better, as generations move. Yeah, so that's what it's all about. And we'd like the interns to support this and attend the meetings and give us suggestions of what topics we need to run. Thanks, Adil.
Yeah, it's a fantastic initiative. And when I heard it for the first time, I think, as I'm just reading the comments, I was in awe as well as to how comprehensive and how well thought out it was. And we wait the rest of the country in bated breath to see what the results are. I know there are people from all the width and breadth of the country on the call, and we look forward to see what comes of it. And I mentioned to Prof. Dlova as well that this is something that could be expanded beyond interns.
Yes, yeah, it's not. It's actually junior doctor, whether it's junior intern, senior intern, ComServe, or medical officer. We have a website for it also. We're posting workshops, research workshops, articles, and a whole lot of things. And I'm glad the other institutions will do that. I think Investec had actually agreed to support the initiative on a national platform.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I think we've expired our time, however. The hour has flown by. There's so many comments and questions that we couldn't get to. Apologies for that. I will download them and go through them and direct them replies to you directly. You're welcome to reach out to me as well, and with any comments or concerns that you do have after this session. For those that they couldn't attend, unfortunately, we will be posting it on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. I want to take this opportunity, though, to give a massive thank you to everybody. First of all, to the panelists for availing yourselves. I thought it was a really insightful conversation. I certainly learned a lot. I hope that you did too. Thank you, Prof. Dlova, to Antoinette and to Tlaleng. I think the climate is ripe for change, and I think that you are three champions in your own fields, and I hope that we go to strength from here, and that we continuously have these conversations, but more importantly, start to look at actions, and just a real big thank you for your time. The next big thanks is just to everybody that's been involved in this project so far. As I mentioned in my intro, it's been coming along since 2018, and you don't do a project for almost two and a half years without people helping you. The support team, the people that have given freely of their time and of their services to get us this far, I cannot thank you enough. Zahir and Pervin, personally, for the film and producing it, it would not have come to fruition without you. Everybody else that has been involved in some small capacity, a real big thank you to you. Massive thank you, obviously, to the participants. As so many people have alluded to on the call, there's such a fear of reprisal and fear of coming forward. So for you to be brave enough to share your faces and share your stories, I cannot thank you enough, because again, the stories would not have been told had it not been for your bravery. And then lastly, to everybody else on the call, thank you for the time. Thank you for engaging. I hope that this is the start of much needed conversation about transformation. And that was always the intention of the documentary, for this to be the starting point rather than kind of the be-all and end-all. But let's take the mantle on. If you are in an institution, if you're part of an SRC body, have those difficult conversations about transformation. Be inspired. I cannot be everywhere in all the institutions, neither can these people on the call, but my hope is that there will be enough champions, enough advocates that are inspired to take this conversation forward. And lastly, if you do want to get into contact with any of the people that, the interventions that was mentioned here, please reach out to me. I'll put you in contact with Antoinette and with Prof. Dlova and whatever else was raised, because these issues are so pervasive that we do need to collectively have these conversations and collectively pool our resources. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. I think it's a great success, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future. There is a possibility of having a follow-up in a few weeks, months' time, to see where we are and to perhaps look at more solution-orientated conversation, more so than what we did today. But let's keep the pressure up, and again, thank you very much for your time, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adil.
Thanks very much, and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Go for it. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Bye. Bye now. My voice is smoke.
I think the first one just quite I don't even know if you say your voice is what.
I'm mock.
Now, bye everybody.
I'm mock and my voice is mock.
That one guy wants to keep talking.
That's fine. Well done, guys. Well done.
Well done. You did so good. I wasn't listening though because I was just reading the things
comments.
And I was posting on Facebook to go to the Instagram thing.
Well done. The comments keep coming through not in the order of
but that's
very delayed,
But it's anticipated. It was.
Yeah.
I think we did a good job.
So it was difficult to address each of them when we'd already passed that topic.
And I just had to kind of try to keep the flow to think, okay, this topic is, this topic. But I think we did okay.